Andrew Williamson here. Welcome back to Williamson Education. Well, we've worked our way through some of the nittiest, grittiest topics in the language, verbs and their tenses. Now we're going to move on to a subject that is a bit more straightforward. That topic is syntax, or sentence structure. We've already begun discussing this topic in an earlier lesson. We're going to take this opportunity today to go into greater depth on the issue. So let's go. Let's hold a microscope up to syntax, the syntax question in the English language. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, syntax is defined as, quote, the set of rules and principles in a language according to which words, phrases, and clauses are arranged to create well-formed sentences. That is, in English, as in most languages, you cannot just put a jumble of words into a group and call that jumble a sentence. Not only do you have to select the words that you will use, but you also have to select the order into which you will place them. That order is the syntax of the sentence. There are many, many rules that govern syntax in English, and we won't have either the time or the desire to get into all of them in this lesson. That said, I want to teach you the broad outlines of syntactical rules so that you can work with the fundamentals. You will pick up other rules through immersive practice in native English-speaking environments. The single most important rule of syntax in English has to do with the arrangements of subjects, verbs, and objects in sentences. In one of our earlier lessons, we discussed the notion of so-called SVO structure, or the subject-verb-object arrangement of items in English language sentences. That rule is and will remain the most essential for you to know. Subjects usually, but not always, come before verbs, and verbs usually, but not always, come before objects. Linguists, or scholars of languages, call SVO the unmarked structure in English. That is to say, it is the arrangement of terms in a sentence that sounds completely normal and unexceptional to a native speaker of the language. Changes of the SVO structure are in theory possible, but they may sound marked or unnormal to a native English speaker. Take these two sentences, for example. I hit the ball. The ball I hit. The first sentence follows a standard SVO structure. The subject is I, the verb is hit, and the object is the ball. The sentence sounds unmarked or normal. The second sentence sounds highly marked or abnormal, however. In it, I have placed the object, the ball, as the first item in the sentence, followed by the subject and the verb. The sentence is not technically incorrect, but it sounds like a really odd, snobby, old-fashioned way of expressing the same idea. These two sentences demonstrate that there is, in fact, some flexibility in English language syntax. Not all deviations from normal syntax produce grammatically incorrect sentences. Rather, some of these deviations produce grammatically correct but odd-sounding sentences that convey different meanings and attitudes depending on the particular kind of change that has occurred. All of this is to say, while you're learning English language syntax, try your best to stick to the standard SVO arrangement. For better or worse, native English speakers can have a tendency to believe that their language is the natural order of things. There's nothing natural about SVO structure, however. It doesn't need to be that way. Other languages follow different normal orders of these items. For instance, if you're coming to English from Japanese, you'll likely find an SOV order, subject, object, verb, to be more comfortable. Why? I don't know. That's just the way it is. A rule is a rule is a rule. Except when there are exceptions, of course. A few moments ago, I gave a definition of syntax from the Oxford English Dictionary, and that definition included two terms whose meanings you may not know. Those terms are phrase and clause. Let's take a moment to set the meanings of these essential terms. Broadly speaking, a phrase is any group of connected words that does not have a subject and a verb. For instance, if I say, that night in Paris, that phrase is a phrase. It is a group of words without a subject and a verb. If I say, the dog in the kennel, that phrase is a phrase. It is a group of words without a subject and a verb. A clause, on the other hand, is a more powerful group of words. It is a group of words that contains a subject and a conjugated verb. For example, if I say, because I get hungry in the evenings, that clause is a clause. It is a group of words that contains a subject, I, and a conjugated verb, get. This clause does not express a complete thought, but that is okay. It meets the criteria for being a clause. Some clauses do stand on their own as complete thoughts, though. Consider this group of words containing a subject and a verb. We went to the movies last night. This clause is a clause because it has a subject, we, and a conjugated verb, went. It also expresses an independent idea, making this clause an even more special kind of clause called an independent clause. We'll discuss this distinction more in a later lesson. The final rule of syntax that I'd like to communicate today has to do with the placement of modifiers in sentences. You'll recall from an earlier discussion that modifiers are words and phrases that tell the audience more information about particular aspects of sentences. Adverbs and adjectives are both kinds of modifiers, but modifiers can be longer than a single word too. They can be entire phrases. For instance, consider this correctly written version of a sentence involving a modifying phrase. Having finished all of her homework, the girl decided to go to bed. In this correct sentence, the phrase having finished all of her homework rightly modifies the noun that comes most immediately after it, the girl. That's a good sentence. Problems can arise with modifiers, however, when they come far away from the items that they modify. Generally speaking, and this is the rule that I would like to stress here, modifying words and phrases should be placed immediately next to the items that they modify in sentences. Failing to place a modifier next to the thing that it modifies can cause an error called ambiguous syntax, which means vague or unclear syntax or sentence structure. We certainly don't want ambiguous sentence structures in our sentences. Let's consider an example of a sentence with ambiguous syntax, so we can see how not to write. Here's the example. Having eaten all of his meal, the plate was placed in the dishwasher by the boy. Notice that this sentence contains a modifying phrase, having eaten all of his meal. And whenever we see a modifying phrase, we must always ask ourselves, who or what does that phrase modify? In this case, who or what has eaten all of his meal? Clearly, when we ask ourselves that question, we can tell that it is the boy who has performed this action. But notice the modifier comes at the beginning of the sentence, while the boy comes all the way at the end. That's no good. That's one very ambiguous sentence. Thankfully, though, there is an easy fix. We just rearrange the syntax of the main clause in the sentence so that we place the boy right next to the modifier, like so. Having eaten all of his meal, the boy placed the plate in the dishwasher. That's so much better. These two major rules, SVO and modifier placement, will get you a long way down the road toward perfect syntax in English. But be aware, the journey will be a long one. You may find yourself needing to rearrange syntax to make yourself understood well into your years as an English speaker. This is itself a normal aspect of language learning. I still hear and see native English speakers making syntax errors in their sentences. So do not expect that just because you have become native, that you will stop making mistakes. I make mistakes from time to time too. But there can be no substitute for a native English-speaking environment. As with just about every aspect of learning this strange and beautiful language that we call English, spending time in a native environment will be an invaluable addition to your study. I could not recommend this experience in stronger terms. Well, that brings us about to the end of our lesson on using correct English syntax and avoiding ambiguities. I'm looking forward to seeing you again for our next class, which will discuss situations in which you might find it useful to change from the subject-verb-object syntactical arrangement. Until next time, my friends, spread the word.